We're live. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Patti Ashley. Welcome to Shameless Facebook Friday Live. I am so excited to be here. We're a little bit late because, again, surprise, surprise, technology always, as my guest today was just said, all great things sometimes require, a little extra getting started. So we're here. We're here. So let us know if you're here over in the chat side, and we'd love to hear your questions. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today. She happens to be my suite mate, actually, and I'm so lucky to have met her. She moved here from Minnesota.
Yep. Chanhassen, Minnesota.
I always get those Midwestern snowy states mixed up.
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
A year or so ago, and opened up Niwot Counseling Center in my office. And she is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she also is an ordained Lutheran minister. And so I'm excited to introduce her today, and so we can have some really good shameless conversations about marriage and sex and religion and
woohoo.
And so welcome, Christine Ruth. Hi,
Thank
Christine.
you so much, Patti. It is so good to be here, and I love the work you do. I really have appreciated. If you haven't purchased Patti's new book on shame-based therapy, it is just so valuable to me, and I'm so grateful for the way that you're applying shame practically so that we can use it in therapy, we can use it in churches, we can use it to help one another heal. So I really love how accessible you're making all the research on shame for everyone. Thank you, Patti.
Well, thank you. And I really didn't pay you to say that, so I appreciate it.
I know you didn't, but I'll send you a bill. Anyway.
So no, I'm so happy to have you here because I think you have a lot to share with our listeners. And I see Trisha's here and Yvette's here. Yay! Thanks for letting us know you're here. So I guess tell us a little bit more about how you got into the work that you do. Yeah, I know you've is your master's in theology or divinity, or what is that?
Yeah, so I have a master's of divinity. So I started out in social work, and I worked with the Department of Human Services for 1 year, and sensed at the end of that year that if I continued to work, I was working with kids who were in state custody, trying to reunite them with their biological parents. And I sensed that year that if I continued to do that, I would be smoking a pack a day. I was young, immature, and I over-identified with all of my clients and took them home with me and worried about them and stayed up all night fretting about the kids in my care. And so after a year of that, I ended up deciding to transition to seminary. I thought I would go to study for 2 years on world religions. But as I, kind of started to explore theology and the history of the church, I realized, wow, there's a lot of powerful places to work here, and I have a lot to learn. I realized I didn't really know much about faith, religion, spirituality, and I ended up changing to a master's of divinity degree so that I could work in churches. And then I think it was about 10 years into it, as I was working in the church, I ended up working in a mission start in Wisconsin, along with my pastor and friend, Remy Diedrich. And as I started doing small groups there, I started to realize, wow, there is a lot of pain and suffering and shame and marital distress and addiction in the church. And people were coming to me as their pastor to give them wisdom and guidance and help them with these major crises. And I was super ill-equipped. I had no idea what I was doing, and I kept referring them out, and they'd be like, no, we want to come to you. So I actually went to get my master's in marriage and family therapy with the intention of staying in the church, and then realized I loved it so much that I transitioned into private practice in the last several years. So anyway, long story short, that's my journey.
Well, no, I appreciate that because it's such a gift that, I love the story. because you're putting the parts together. And you and I had a great conversation about how much that does show up in our therapy work with people who've had experiences in religion, and how it affects the shame. And so tell us about that. I mean, I know that's a big open-ended question, but the
Yeah.
other,
How many hours do you have,
I know,
Patti?
I know, right? So the other question I want to get to is also our conversation about your interest in the feminine mystics, because to me,
Mm.
my work really, when we look at shame, we look at the suppression of our emotional self, and which to me is the feminine, which is again a whole other conversation. But start with just the basics of how you see shame showing up for you related to religion in your work now as a licensed marriage and family therapist, and the
Yeah.
beauty that your clients have of your history that you bring to your work.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, first, I would be derelict if I didn't, admit that I have a long journey, personal journey with shame related to my own faith. And a big part of why I, got engaged with therapy in the first place as a 14, 15-year-old was because I had so much shame and inner conflict related to the way at that time I was relating to my spiritual beliefs. So, for instance, I was a kid, a girl that loved to study. I geeked out on education, and when I got into high school, I really started to feel, called. I was one of those kids that wanted to become a pastor when I was like 11 or 12. But I was a part of a spiritual tradition at the time that didn't, encourage women to think of themselves as spiritual leaders. And so, one of my pastors I went to two different churches, but a pastor in a non-denominational church I attended, said, "Oh, if you go and pursue seminary or higher education, it's just going to destroy your faith." So I thought I had a lot of shame about first of all, my desire to want to pursue
Yeah.
spiritual leadership, spiritual education, my desire to want to even, hang out with the big boys. I always,
Ah.
as a girl, and I don't know if you can relate to this, Patti, but I was definitely reared an environment where, the men got to smoke cigars and talk theology and philosophy, and the women did the work in the kitchen.
Mhm.
And I wanted to talk theology, right? I know my grandparents did too. My grandmas, they did too, but they often ended up peeling potatoes instead.
Right.
So I had a lot of shame about,
Right.
uh,
And
you know,
you're even younger than me, so I think for you to still have experienced it, I mean, it just speaks to, you know, we have a long way
yeah,
to go. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
yeah, we still have a long way to go.
Mhm.
A long way to go. And given I grew up in rural Wisconsin, so that has its own culture for sure. But anyway, so I had shame about that. And then I had a ton of shame about, as many women, and I'm really seeing this in therapy, a ton of shame about, sexual desire, pleasure, dating. I was one of those girls that was raised in what I call a purity culture. So I really believed that I needed to save myself sexually for marriage, and I had a purity ring, and I wasn't going to date boys until I was ready to marry them.
Wow.
And that was the culture. We all signed a little letter saying that we were committed to Jesus in my youth group, and that was in my non-denominational church of which
Wow.
I was involved, right?
Yikes.
And so I know, right? And
You
there are
still have the
so
ring?
many.
What does the ring look like?
No, not at all. No, if I had the ring, one of my colleagues, Nadia Boltz-Weber, for her book
Oh,
Shameless,
she's
she
wonderful.
collected purity rings and melted them and turned them into uh, a big vagina idol, which I thought was really hilarious.
I love
But
it.
that was part of her recovery
Yeah.
from kind of growing up in this
Yeah.
purity culture, and so for me, there was incredible shame about any sort of sexual desire as a woman. And so I think a lot of us, and I don't know if you experienced this, Patti, and so I'll shut up in a minute, but I think a lot of us as women developed what I would call a split self. So we had this church self, this pure, good girl self. And I could go to leadership, I was involved in my youth group, involved in leadership opportunities. And I was, this sexless, pure girl.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then, filled with so much shame, because then I would swing into this other side where I was like, I want to go out with my friends. I want to flirt. I want to date. I want to explore, who am I sexually? And anyway, so there were just these two different selves that I developed in order to kind of manage all the shame related to that. And I see that a lot in my clients.
I write about that a little bit in Letters to Freedom, my experience of being in the church book group when I was like, sixth grade, seventh grade. And then the older boys, they were 4 years older than me and my friend. We would go behind the church after practice and make out. And
Nice.
And then my shame, and maybe I'll tell the story when I do my series in February and March on sex, shame, and love and relationships, because I got some stories to tell on how that went, but I'm not going to go there now. But right. It's
awesome.
Yeah. And Sister Claire slamming the door when she found out that all this was going on after folk group practice was quite
intense.
Yeah, because it's a natural part of development, right? And the girls I work with now, and you probably see this too, the high school and even young college girls and middle school too, which I don't work as much with anymore. They always say the same thing, you hear the same stories in our practice a lot, right? You're either a slut or a prude.
Mm-hmm.
And girls today are growing up having to choose, am I a slut or a prude? And where's the middle ground? And I think that's what we're talking about today is where's that healthy sexuality, that shameless experience of our human bodies and the experience of our sexuality. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you sharing that split self, and this. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Patti. For your experiences too, growing up Catholic, it doesn't matter what denomination, what religion you grow up in. We all have our stories about how our faith, our church, our religion somehow reinforced shame, especially around sexuality for us. And it's just so funny to me to think that church, because I grew up in the church was also where I had all of my, ironically, first sexual experiences, right? Like I had my first kiss at Lutheran Bible camp, and I had my, we'd have lock-ins and things that we were doing in those lock-in rooms.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not going there, but I hear you.
Anyway, yeah. So, that just as you say, finding a path towards integration, not only in our, personal lives, but as parents. One of my passions today is really working with parents on helping their sons, their daughters have a more integrated spirituality and sexuality. And I know that there are a lot of healthy churches out there that are working on this too. Anyway, I do think that we're recognizing that, at least as a church, many churches are recognizing that we have created a lot of shame and actually created, fostered and pervade a lot of sexual trauma. Not only through a culture of, not being aware of how, the levels of sexual assault that were happening, sexual abuse, but also, neurologically, I think a lot about how we created a whole culture of kids who developed these neural pathways that every time they had a trigger of sexual desire or sexual passion, they learned to shut it down, right? That's naughty. That's yucky. Yeah. And so when you are a teenager, so you come into your sexual self around 12 or 13, and now the average age of marriage is about 32. So if you imagine that for some of us, 10, 20 years, we're presented with a sexual stimulant, for instance, trigger, oh, he's hot or she looks good. And then we are taught sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes by our faith tradition, that that's naughty. Like you can't feel that. That's lust. And
Right.
so then we develop a neural pathway. We feel the trigger and we shut down. So now what I'm doing is I'm working with all these couples who, for instance, waited to have sex until they got married, and some of them waited, until their 30s, and they were 32-year-old virgins. They got married. Now they can't have sex. They're struggling because they've developed all these neural pathways that they shut down. They dissociate from their bodies. And even though they intellectually know, okay, now it's okay, now it's supposed to be okay, they have a neural pathway that dissociates every time they feel desire. And so now they're struggling, and they're saying to me, we've been married for 15 years and we've had sex 3 times. My one partner usually is more unhappy with it than the other. And often, not always, but often it stems from what I call religiously transmitted diseases that are really about shame.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so much what I talk about in the shame book about the neurological pathways, the stories that we make up that override, that create even the experiences in the body. And so obviously sexuality is definitely a body experience, and to be able to fully be in our body and rewrite that story of shame, it's a big piece of work.
It is a big piece of work.
Yeah.
It's a big piece of work. And what a joy that I have right now that I can, first of all, that I get it personally when my clients are coming to me with this, saying things like, I freeze up every time we have sex. Or I have some male clients that have said to me, I can't have sex with my wife. Like, she's a good girl.
Yeah.
And so they have a past with, okay, so you only have sex with bad girls. And sex for them is equated with kind of a negative, rebellious past. And therefore, they feel they have a lot of guilt and shame that come up when they're trying to enjoy sex with their long-term partner.
Yeah.
Which is like, wow. We've messed this up. How do we bring healing to it? And I'm grateful that I can really talk with them about this.
Yeah.
And see a lot of them find healing.
Right. Right. And I remember you were telling me the story about when you moved to Boulder and you were deciding if you wanted to really, put out there that your work as a minister, is also part of who you do, and just keep it licensed in marriage family therapy. And then you found that the people that were really coming to you were coming from the church and coming from these backgrounds and coming to you because of your background. And so I think it's so beautiful that you get to put the two together, and and we can have these conversations. Because I don't think we talk about this stuff, do we? I mean,
we don't. And
come into your office and the behind closed doors, but then you go out into the real world and everybody's just bumbling around doing their thing.
That's right. And I still think, you're right, Patty. When I got to Boulder, I knew that Boulder, is what I would call a spiritually innovative culture. I knew coming here that, people are all over the map in Boulder, and I love that. I love the diversity, and I love the way people relate to spirituality in so many different ways. So I was afraid that by calling myself, or even owning my Master's of Divinity on my licensure, that I would turn away a lot of my clients, that they wouldn't feel safe with me, that they would worry about being judged, being condemned, because unfortunately, a lot of Christian counselors are like that. But yes.
Well, that's an important part, though. Stop right there, because again, there's this story that if these are the beliefs I was taught when I was young, why wouldn't because it comes from people in positions of authority. So why wouldn't this therapist in a position of authority have the same belief? And for you to say a lot of the Christian counselors are, I remember when you and I met and you said you did spiritual counseling, I was like, what kind of spiritual counseling?
Because you were anxious. Yeah.
No. We're not going to be one of these judgy Christian
Yeah.
counselors. Sorry to judge the judgy Christian counselors. I probably should take that back, but I can't because we're live and I can't edit this. But anyway, my point is,
Yeah.
I get that, but here's that
Yeah.
repetition of the story, and that's so important what you just said. So people come to you and they're able to feel safe and rewrite a story with somebody in a position of I don't really think of myself as in a position of authority, but our clients look at us that way as, whoa, you're the therapist, and we really want to balance that out in good therapy and let our clients see us as humans and not people who are wiser and telling them what to do. But for you to have that gift of being able to have that healing space for people, I think it's bigger than we can even language right now. That's what I'm noticing.
I agree, Patti. And I think, it's interesting to me. A lot of my clients come to me because they see that I have a master's of divinity, that they know that I have this church background, or at least a seminary background, and they're beating themselves up and they want me to beat them up. Okay. So they're actually seeking kind of, they're actually seeking me to partner with them in perpetuating their shame. Okay. So they have, for instance,
That's
I have a client who,
right there too. Another really, really important piece. Wow.
yes. Yeah. So I've had clients who, for instance, are feeling naughty about something they've done. Like, say, they're, struggling with an addiction. A lot of my clients struggle with an addiction. So they're coming in and they're confessing their addiction to me, and they're saying, I am a horrible person. I am so messed up, and I need you to fix me. I need you to fix me. What they want, again, and you mentioned this before, Patti, they want an external authority to reprimand them and punish them, and then say, you'd better fix this. You'd better be, a good girl, a good boy. And they're hoping that by me saying that to them, it will motivate them to change.
Yeah, the old story again. God, it's
It's
beautiful, Christine. That's so well said. So
Yeah.
true. And it's so unconscious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. I love that you could language that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so then, right, then my job becomes instead for them to notice the part of them, and I think it's an ego part of them, that we all have these ego parts that we develop to function in the world. We might develop a perfectionist, an inner perfectionist. We might develop an inner people pleaser part. And those parts, we develop them as strategies to kind of motivate ourselves or to punish ourselves, right? And so they want me to become that voice of shame, that voice of you should. And so then my job is to help them notice their shoulder, okay? The part of them that says, you should, you'd better, you'd better be nice. You'd better be good to him, even though he keeps violating you again and again. You'd better forgive him.
Right.
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 And I don't say that.
Yeah.
Instead, I want them to notice, of course. I mean, of course, we don't say that. We want them to notice the shamer. We want them to notice the parts of them that have taken on these roles of the perfectionist, of the people pleaser, of the accommodator, of the peacemaker, and get to know, why do they have these roles in their life, and how instead can they separate from those roles, those ego roles, and discover that still small inner voice.
Yeah.
Right? That's the voice of self with a capital S, or as a pastor, I like to say it's the Holy Spirit in you, the part of you that's giving compassion and freedom and inviting you into this life without bondage to the ego.
The immortal diamond, as Richard Rohr would say.
The immortal diamond. I love Richard Rohr.
I know.
Such a mentor.
Yeah. Authentic self, which is what my whole work is about, is reconstructing that. And you're right, people are going to come in with the old story and that's all they know. So it's this unconscious repetition. So our job is to help them write a new story, but it's so ingrained in the unconscious that again, it's a big piece of work.
Right. Yeah, Jesus has this great story about discovering the pearl of great price. And that when you discover it, you sell everything for it. I mean, you get rid of everything else in your life to discover that pearl of great price. And that's, the immortal diamond, as Richard Rohr calls it, or this Holy Spirit in us, the part of God, of God's Spirit that's eternal. And, Jung called it the collective unconsciousness, right? That gives us access to all of our resources of courage and compassion and curiosity and caring, and the list goes on and on. That's the pearl of great price that Jesus is inviting us to discover, because that's the path to freedom.
Yeah.
Shame, in the Bible, we use the word sin. And I think the word sin has really been misconstrued and really has gotten screwed up in our culture. I think sin is related to the ego taking over, right? So in the Bible, the word Satan is the accuser. So the word Satan literally means the accuser. So it's the voice in our head that accuses us, that always holds us under condemnation, right? That says you should have, wow, you really screwed that up. You're worthless.
Yeah.
You're never going to get past this. Look at how you keep acting. Look at what you keep doing. That's the voice of the accuser. If we're going to talk about Satan, that is the voice of sin, right? It's the script of shame that we play.
Yeah.
Right?
Shame, right. Shame is Satan.
Shame is Satan. Yeah. And, sadly, the church historically, for whatever reason, instead of, focusing on how we, sin as kind of this turning inside, this becoming self-conscious and always second guessing ourselves and living in fear and self-doubt and anger and living in addictions to our ego parts, right? That are always trying to distract us or fix us. Instead of thinking about shame or sin that way, which I think is what Jesus was trying to get us to understand, we've turned sin into this thing of like, look at that naughty sexual behavior that he's engaging in or she's engaging in. Instead of looking at sin as the systems of racial injustice or economic injustice that we're swimming in right now.
Right.
They're so familiar to us, we can't even see them. These are the powers and principalities of this world that we're in bondage to, right? Like, of course I should have a much bigger house than you. I earned it. I deserve it, right? This is how I sin, right?
So, Marianne Williamson interviewed Carolyn Mace on her first podcast, and I listened to it yesterday, and it's brilliant, and I think you will love it. And
nice.
They thought about the evolution of religion and how the last century was really about like the 60s, and the 70s, the revolution of people saying, we don't want anything to do with religion anymore. But they also kind of cut off the idea of spirituality. And then now we're moving into more mindfulness practices and meditation practices and self-awareness. And she says, that is God. Carolyn Mace is saying that is God. So we're recognizing that in order to have wholeness, we need both, we need all of us, not just the logical, scientific, we don't need religion part. And I think for me, one of my greatest teachers a long time ago in a Course in Miracles said the difference between religion and spirituality is religion is external and spirituality is internal. And, religion has created so much shame in a lot of misinterpretation of the Bible in terms of, was my friend telling me about, it was the 4th century when Augustine said that you're the original sin, and that's been going on for all these centuries since. And the idea of what did Jesus really come to teach, and what is spirituality to people. And I love that you quoted Jesus, because I'm a big fan of his teachings, but who would know that from what I said earlier? Because I think that
Yeah.
the teachings of Christ in their purity, again, here's my segue into the feminine mystics, the women mystics, is led me to my really love for Mary Magdalene, and what she represented in religion, because again, there was a split. There was the whore and the virgin, Mary Magdalene and the Blessed Mother. Growing up in the Catholic Church, we're one of the religions that did have at least some honoring of the feminine, but we honored the Virgin Mary, the woman without sin, the woman who never had sex. So she's pure, so even though we actually honored a woman, we made her this pure woman that you were talking about earlier. And when I was little, again, growing up, went to 12 years of Catholic school and had religion class every day or week or however often we had it, went to church and confession anyway. So,
Yeah.
I always kind of was a curious kind of kid. I was never one that would just kind of buy something. I sort of did because you had to, or you'd stand in the corner if you didn't, right? But I was always curious. And the teachings of Jesus were always important to me, as well as who was this Mary Magdalene? So when the Da Vinci Code came out and it was revealed by my favorite scholar, Margaret Starbird, who also was traditional Catholic, says, I believe from scripture, from me looking at scriptures, not from the Gnostic Gospels, that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were married. That was the wedding feast in Cana, and that they also were together as teachers. And so I've since gone to southern France and taken a group over there with my friend Junia and Divine Adventures. Got to know a wonderful tour guide over there, and hopefully we'll get back there. But my work with Mary Magdalene is all about what we're talking about. And then you and I had this conversation about the Christian or the mystics. I don't know if it's Christian mystics, but because what you said at the very beginning about the men are smoking the cigars and having these conversations and the women are kind of over here. So your question is, how did these women step fully into, and I think it's really, here's my ADHD brain going all over the place, but it's really timely with what's going on now with our Supreme Court nomination and rights of women, and what we're seeing politically of women really fighting for their voice and fighting for equality in religion. I gonna kind of like, again, another open-ended question for you is to tell us a little bit about your interest in women, particularly having their voice. And anyway, I'm just gonna, that I know it's not a specific question, but
no, I love it. Thank you, Patti. Thank you. I am learning and so much from you, and I'm so fascinated by some of the things you're saying that I really haven't heard. So I'm kind of like, is trying to integrate all of that. But there's definitely been an incredible resurgence in the last, several decades of a recovery of the mystical traditions and the contemplative prayer traditions. Because I think spiritually, we're going through this huge paradigm shift where instead of seeing spirituality as top down, kind of expert stance, like where's the trained expert that's going to disseminate the information, we're realizing that we need to learn to find an inner authority, right? An inner authority. What is the Holy Spirit saying to me? When I read the Bible, or when I read, whatever spiritual scripture that you resonate with, what's happening inside of me? Where am I feeling invited, led, guided? And then doing that in community is even better. And I think, for me, I'm so fascinated in particular by the courage of the early women mystics. I mean, I think about St. Catherine of Siena. I think of St. Teresa of Avila, and I'm probably not saying their names right.
I say Avila, but
Avila.
Wrong. And Carolyn Mace wrote that whole book on entering the castle. I love her work.
I haven't read that one yet, but I need to. I know Mirabai Starr just wrote a fantastic book on the women contemplatives called Wild Mercy. one of my favorite books.
Mm-hmm.
And the saint that got me hooked on this was Hildegard de Bingen.
Mm-hmm.
Hildegard de Bingen, was a German saint who I'm going to mess up. I'm terrible with my numbers. What century she was in? I want to say 14th, but I think she was far earlier than that. I might look it up as we're talking.
That's okay.
But I'm so fascinated by how Hildegard, got these visions from God, and some people say, oh, she was having seizures, some sort of euphoric experience. We don't know, but God just downloaded on this woman. And, I think God downloads on a lot of people, but Hildegard received it. She was like, this is good stuff. And I'm going to write it down. And at the time, no woman had any sort of position of authority. And yet no woman had authored a book that the Pope approved. And many women had been burned at the stake, gotten rid of, silenced for doing similar. And yet she had the courage to say, I am hearing this voice inside of me, and I am going to write this stuff down. And she wrote volumes of books on health and on philosophy and theology. And you're like, where did she get all this?
Yeah.
And so, right, all these women who were so young and had the courage to trust that still small voice, that the Holy Spirit was speaking through them, and then found the courage not only to speak it to the ladies around them, but to allow the Pope to read it, who, at least in Hildegard's case, didn't kill her, thank God. And we still get to treasure all of her incredible works today, right?
Yeah.
And how about you, Patti? I know you have a huge love of the women mystics and contemplatives. Does that relate to shame to you somehow?
Well, I think the question that really intrigued me when we were talking the other day about your curiosity around what was it in these women that allowed them to overcome the suppression of the feminine. And
Yeah.
I just got chills because that's really my work. And I'm just like, RBG and AOC to me are modern day mystics and Mary Magdalenes because they're women. They're not silent. And women have been silent for way too long because they've been burned at the stake. They've been drowned. They've been beheaded. The Inquisition in the 14th century, that's where the word the torture to the third degree, giving you the third degree comes from, because these women who were midwives, they were I get really, they were birthing babies, and they were accused of being witches because they had that much power to help a woman birth a baby, and women birthing babies men were afraid of that. We have that much power. Men can't do that. Women were accused of being witches for various things, and they were tortured to 3 different degrees of torture until they would admit that they were a witch. And then if they did admit they were a witch, they would be drowned or killed.
Yeah.
So, women have been silent for way too long. I'm tired of it. And that's why, oh gosh, I'm all like riled up now. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it.
Reminding me why I do this Shameless Facebook Friday, and I face my shame, and I face all the things that have happened to women and myself, particularly in my life, of trying to own my own authenticity and live a life that, has a lot of elements of what other people may judge or may trigger my shame. And so when I go back to the roots of religion and women, particularly, I really, really appreciate our conversation so much because of that. And I think time's up. This has gone on too long. And it's important for us to,
Amen.
I'm just going to put out what Carolyn May said too yesterday, which was really frightening. And I try to stay away from politics, but I'm going to do it anyway. If this current administration continues, she was saying that, it's like Hitler. We're going to be oppressed even more. We could be jailed and imprisoned just like women were and men too, and journalists and people who are speaking truth. I don't think it's even really about gender anymore. To me, it's about, people speaking up about this whole self,
Right.
this Satan, sex, lust, naughtiness
Yeah.
that we're trying to overcome. It's how are we becoming more whole, and how are we embracing our feminine and our intuition and our knowing and our emotions. And we have a
Hmm.
lot of work to do. So
Yeah.
I just want
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah. You're preaching it.
I know, because I'm remembering now how important it is to me, and to give women a voice and people a voice of wholeness. And we're not trying to lead people astray into the fire of hell. I mean, my grandmother used to tell me, if a boy tried to have sex with me, I should carry a safety pin with me and stick him in the penis.
Wow.
That's
Wow. That's a strategy. Did you ever try it?
hell no.
Those poor guys. Oh my word. Wow, yeah, that gets right to it. That's sensual. Um, you know, yeah, I am so sobered by the realization that if I had been born in a different time, I might have been burned at the stake as a witch, and that is just
Oh, I'm sure
uh,
I was many times in previous lives. I have no doubt. Yeah.
right. Just for having a theological thought, or desiring to use the gifts that I believe God's placed within me, that are my spiritual gifts, right? But that has always been threatening to the establishment. Whenever we use our spiritual gifts, we're threatening to the establishment. And yeah, I think that we have to claim a whole different level of listening to the internal. And interesting. It's so interesting to me that so much of Jesus's ministry was about freeing women from shame. Going and talking to the woman in idolatry, going and hanging out with the woman at the well who was hiding out because people were judging her. And Jesus just dove in there, and he was like, "Hey, I know who you are, and you get to follow me. You're part of the clan. You get to be part of the team. Stop living in your shame. Stop hiding out. Stop, hiding the secrets. I know you. I love you. You're good. There's a well of living water in you. Go for it and express it, right? And how did that ministry, Jesus's profound passion for women and freeing them from shame, get turned into the religiously transmitted diseases that the church has perpetuated?
Love that.
um
Religious RTDs.
RTDs, yeah. Ed Gunger, one of my old mentors from the past, made up that little phrase, RTDs, and it's just stuck with me. Because it is what religion has perpetuated is so antithetical to the freeing ministry of Jesus, which is like, there's no condemnation, let he or she without sin cast the first stone.
Mhm.
And Jesus was like this ninja in all these public shaming situations, saying,
Right.
go free, be free of this. And you're right, with our political establishment today, how do we help men and women and all people listen to their internal voice? And I believe that we are, that our current political situation today is a huge retraction. So when anything is about to be born, when a new paradigm is about to be born, cultures go through a major retraction. Often they freak out. It's like the birthing pains, the labor pains of the new reality. And so I think that what we've been suffering through the last 4 years and beyond, really all over the globe, is kind of the cultural retraction or the labor pains of something new being born.
Yeah.
And whether you talk about that as the feminine, or you talk about that as a new collective consciousness of our connection and the importance of love.
I love that. And we are the midwives, and we are the ones that need to continue to birth this new paradigm, which to me is hopefully much more equal and whole than this, wounded patriarch that's been going on. So all of us out there
Yeah.
who are working to help people birth a whole self, I think we're the midwives, and I do think that we have to not be silenced. And I'm so so grateful for you. This has been an amazing conversation. I definitely want to have you back. So you're the last of 6 today. I started with Rebecca Folsom, who's a sweetheart singer songwriter, and interviewed.
Awesome.
I know Katie O'Keefe. We had a tech difficulty, so I'm going to try and get Katie back in 2021 as well. But after today, next week, I'm starting a special Shameless Facebook Friday series on grief and grace and the holidays, because I really want to help people get through the holidays. And it's also the 4-year anniversary of losing my beloved Lawrence Freedom on the 13th. So I'll do a Facebook Friday Live that day, and I'll do some reading from the book. And like I said, in there, I talk about my episodes behind the church after Foku practice, me trying to discover my sexuality after having lost my father to a sudden heart attack, and
Wow.
reconciling that and the church and all that. And then we're going to honor Jeremy Taylor in January, Billy and I, one of our dream teachers. And I'm going to take a little break from the interviews, but back in full force in February. Sex, shame, love, and relationships. I'm going to do another 6-week series. So I'd love to have you on that, Christine.
My favorite topics. Love it.
We can talk so much more about, I think we've been all silenced way too long from this sense of healthy sexuality, and to be able to overcome our shame, and to really, be whole as women and men. Again, it's not about gender for me anymore, or, transgender and all of our gender equalities and our racial equality and our, we're all human beings. And so to honor all of that and to really work with what is the shame stories, you did such a beautiful job of presenting, how that does show up in your work. And people get you.
Yeah, Patti, well, just first of all, thank you so much for having the courage to host these conversations and putting yourself out there, and always leading with vulnerability and creating these safe spaces, these brave spaces where people can tell their stories. I've been tracking, with your Friday conversations, and learned so much from last week's conversation about addiction and recovery. And I just appreciate your vision for this and all the work you're doing. Anyway, and
and I just want to say, you reminded me why I do this, because this isn't, putting myself out there isn't like I'm going to do that kind of MO. It's, I have to do it. And you reminded me today. I'm feeling even more motivated and a little too. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad, right? This is why we have to have these conversations, because it reignites our passion and our callings and our sense of vocation, right?
And we're the midwives who aren't going to be killed at the stake.
Midwives. We are not going to be burned at the stake this Halloween, girlfriend.
That's right.
And yeah, so if you need therapy, I'm doing teletherapy these days. I know you are too, Dr. Ashley. And we are available. And I have a website, www.niwatcounseling.com. Invite new clients to check out my practice, check out my blog. And Patti, you and I are writing books together in my head. So hopefully we'll have a book coming out soon, right?
Let's do that.
All right.
You have a friend of yours on in our chat room, Kristen.
Yeah. Hey, Kristen Johnson. Love ya.
Yeah.
Good friend from Waconia, Minnesota. That I miss. Yes. So yeah.
Okay. Well, hello, Minnesota.
Yeah, hello to Minnesota and all the other peeps out there in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. So anyway, thank you, Patti, again for this exciting conversation. And I know this is just the beginning of these sorts of conversations. So thank you.
Yeah, I think yes. Like I said, you've reminded me. I even had a dream last night that I was forgetting to feed my little baby, and
Oh.
I think that's what my baby is this suppression of the feminine, and
Hmm.
that's really important to me,
Beautiful.
especially in the.
Oh, is that a dream archetype, feeding the baby? I have that all the time.
Oh yeah, our babies are the things that we're trying to, we've given birth to, but we need to really nurture. And I kept thinking, I gotta feed the baby. I gotta feed my baby. I mean, it's like all about the little baby. So, and I wasn't sure
Oh.
what part of me that baby was until we talked. So,
Oh, I
shame
love
you.
that. That just gave me major insight into a dream I've been having. So thank you for that.
You're
I can't wait for your Jeremy Taylor series. Love
welcome.
him. Look forward to that.
We're doing a special thing for him on the third anniversary of his passing. And so you'll get some info on that. And thanks, Yvette and Trisha, for being with us, and Kristen and anybody else. Please share this if you think it'll be valuable. I'm hoping, again, we're going to, like Christine said, what did you call it? What happens before birth?
Oh, we're in the labor pains. We're in the great retraction.
Mm-hmm.
But we're the midwives.
Yeah.
We're birthing a new paradigm.
Yeah. So thank you,
Yeah.
Christine. And don't forget to, if you get a chance, put your your website in the chat too at some point.
Oh,
Hi,
okay, great.
Steve. Glad you were with us. All right.
Okay.
Love you all.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Okay.
joining us. Mwah.
All right. Thanks,
Take
Patti.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.